Welcome to the Hazardous Materials and California Proposition 65 training. Behavior technicians deliver services in a variety of settings where they may be exposed to various chemicals or hazardous materials. Some examples of hazardous items may include common household items, air fresheners, or appliances that use natural gas. Also, some materials in the workplace are known by the state of California to cause cancer and reproductive harm. However, with proper training, you can enhance your personal safety and that of your client. So let's go over the outline for this training. First, we will go over the definition of hazardous materials. Then, we will review the Hazard Communication Standard, as well as the classification of hazardous materials, such as into different types of physical hazards and health hazards. Then, we will discuss the content of labels on hazardous materials. We will also go over the contents of safety data sheets, as well as review a sample safety data sheet. Also, we will go over strategies on reducing exposure to hazardous materials, as well as general guidelines for responding to an emergency, which involves exposure to hazardous materials. Finally, we will review the specifics of California's Proposition 65. Hazardous materials are considered any substances or compounds that may produce adverse effects on the health and safety of others. This includes health hazards such as irritation, sensitization, or carcinogenicity, otherwise known as cancerous. Hazardous materials also pose a wide range of physical hazards, such as flammability, corrosion, and explosibility. We will discuss these hazards in detail in this training. Let's take a moment for our first quiz question. Question number 1 is, what are considered hazardous materials? Is it A, airborne viruses causing flu-like symptoms, B, particles that can cause hazards to others, C, any substances or compounds that will enhance the health and safety of others, or D, any substances or compounds that may produce adverse effects on the health and safety of others? Correct. The answer is D. Hazardous materials are any substances or compounds that may produce adverse effects on the health and safety of others. The U.S. Occupational Health and Safety Administration, or OSHA, regulates worker exposure to chemicals. Specifically, OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard, or HCS, was designed to ensure that employers provide information to workers about chemical and toxic substance hazards in the workplace, as well as associated protective measures. In particular, OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard requires the development and dissemination of the following information. First, chemical manufacturers and importers are required to evaluate the hazards of the chemicals they produce or import and prepare labels and safety data sheets to convey the hazard information to their customers. Second, employers with hazardous chemicals in their workplaces must have labels and safety data sheets for their exposed workers and train them to handle the chemicals appropriately. Furthermore, the Hazard Communication Standard set forth a hazard classification system, which provides specific criteria for classification of health and physical hazards, as well as classification of mixtures. It also requires labels. For instance, chemical manufacturers and importers are required to provide a label that includes a harmonized signal word, pictogram, and hazard statement for each hazard class and category. Precautionary statements must also be provided. Also, the HCS made updates to the safety data sheets, in which they have a specified 16-section format. Finally, the HCS has guidelines on information and training, which states that workers should receive training on the new labels, elements, and safety data sheets format to facilitate recognition and understanding. The Hazard Communication Standard is also aligned with the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, or GHS. The GHS was adopted in 2003 by the United Nations, UN. It provides a common and coherent approach for the classification of health, physical, and environmental hazards, as well as specifying what information should be included on labels of hazardous chemicals and safety data sheets. So let's go over the hazard classification system. First, the system classifies physical hazards. the physical hazards listed in the HCS can be broken into 9 classes, as described by the U.S. Department of Transportation. These include Class 1, explosives; Class 2, gases under pressure; Class 3, flammable liquids; Class 4, flammable solids, spontaneously combustible materials, and materials that are dangerous when wet; Class 5, oxidizers and organic peroxides; Class 6, poisons and etiologic materials; Class 7, radioactive materials; Class 8, corrosives; and Class 9, miscellaneous. We will now describe these classes. The first class includes explosives. Specifically, an explosive substance is a solid or liquid substance, or mixture of substances, which is in itself capable by chemical reaction of producing gas at such a temperature and pressure and at such a speed as to cause damage to the surroundings. Some examples of explosives are dynamite, flares, display fireworks, ammunition, and blasting agents. Class 2 includes gases under pressure. These are gases which are contained in a receptacle or container at a high pressure, or which are liquefied and refrigerated. Accidental rupture of the container and the rapid release of the pressurized gas can result in injury to persons and damage to objects in the vicinity. Not only can the gas be released with great force, but the force of the release may propel the container for a long distance. The hazard from some gases under pressure may be strictly mechanical, such as compressed air. Others may present other types of hazards, such as being flammable, for instance, methane and propane, or toxic, for example, ammonia and chlorine. Some examples of gases under pressure are compressed gases, liquefied gases, dissolved gases, and refrigerated liquefied gases. Gases under pressure also include flammable gas. This is a gas that burns at a specific temperature and pressure when air touches it. Gases that ignite pose a serious safety hazard, especially since most gases are stored in cylinders or other containers. Many of these gases have no odor, and their presence cannot be detected without the use of a specific detector. Should a leak occur, the gas often accumulates, forming a pocket of gas. These pockets can accumulate at ground level or towards the room's ceiling, depending on the gas's density. Pockets of certain gases can, in turn, lead to fires or explosions. The gas's container may provide another hazard because, should it explode, the container may become a missile or projectile and send parts of the container in all directions. Some examples of flammable gases are propane and helium. Another type of gas under pressure includes a flammable aerosol, which includes any non-refillable receptacle containing a gas compressed, liquefied, or dissolved under pressure and fitted with a release device allowing the contents to be ejected as particles in suspension in a gas, or as a foam, paste, powder, liquid, or gas. Furthermore, gases under pressure include oxidizing gas, which is any gas which may, generally by providing oxygen, cause or contribute to the combustion of other material more than air does. Some examples of oxidizing gas are oxygen-containing chemicals, like nitrous oxide, and halogens, like bromine, chlorine, and fluorine. Here is our next quiz question. Question number 2. What is a potential danger of gases under pressure? Is it A, mechanical, in other words, compressed air releasing, B, flammable, C, toxic, or D, all of the above? Great, the answer is D, all of the above. Specifically, the dangers of gases under pressure include mechanical, flammable, and toxic hazards. Now let's go over the third class of physical hazards, which are flammable liquids. Again, flammables are materials that can be set on fire or ignited. Specifically, a flammable liquid is a liquid having a flash point of not more than 93 degrees Celsius. A flash point is the minimum temperature at which a liquid gives off vapor in sufficient concentration to form an ignitable mixture with air near the surface of the liquid. When a chemical flashes, the resulting flame will spread through the vapor from the ignition source to the nearby surface of the liquid. An example of flammable liquid is gasoline. Class 4 includes flammable solids, spontaneously combustible materials, and materials that are dangerous when wet. A flammable solid is a solid which is readily combustible or may cause or contribute to fire through friction. In addition, readily combustible solids are powdered, granular, or pasty chemicals, which are dangerous if they can be easily ignited by brief contact with an ignition source, such as a burning match, and if the flame spreads rapidly. Some examples include ammonium, picrate, and wetted white phosphorus sodium. Furthermore, self-reactive chemicals are thermally unstable liquid or solid chemicals liable to undergo a strong exothermic decomposition even without the participation of oxygen, air. Class 5 includes oxidizers and organic peroxides. One type is an oxidizing liquid, that is, a liquid which, while in itself not necessarily combustible, may generally, by yielding oxygen, cause or contribute to the combustion of other material. This class also includes an oxidizing solid, that is, a solid which, while in itself not necessarily combustible, may generally, by yielding oxygen, cause or contribute to the combustion of other material. Some examples include ammonium nitrate, methyl ethyl, and ketone peroxide. Also in this category is an organic peroxide, which is a liquid or solid organic substance that has two oxygen atoms joined together. Some examples include benzoyl peroxide and allyl hydroperoxide. Class number 6 includes poisons and etiologic materials. Specifically, a poisonous material is a material, other than a gas, which is known to be so toxic to humans as to afford a hazard to health during transportation, or which, in the absence of adequate data on human toxicity, 1. is presumed to be toxic to humans because it falls within any one of the following categories: oral toxicity, dermal toxicity, or inhalation toxicity. Some examples of poisons include medicines, cleaning products, such as drain cleaners, toilet bowl cleaners, rust removers, and oven cleaners, nail glue remover or nail primer, and antifreeze. Poisonous materials can enter into the body through ingestion, through contact with the skin, or through the lungs. It is very important that you do not combine two substances. A single substance may not be toxic on its own, but when combined with another substance, it can become highly toxic. Some household materials may contain one or more chemical hazard. Materials may be flammable and toxic or corrosive and combustible. Always take extreme care when handling or being near toxic or poisonous materials. Class 7 includes radioactive materials, which is defined as any substance that contains unstable radioactive atoms that give off radiation as they decay. One example of a radioactive material is uranium. Finally, Class 8 includes corrosives. Corrosive chemicals can destroy living tissue with which they come into contact. In toxology, the term corrosive normally means causing visible destruction of the skin, eyes, or the lining of the respiratory tract or the gastrointestinal tract on contact. Corrosion is manifested by ulcers, cell death, and scar formation. Some examples of corrosive chemicals are battery fluid, sodium hydroxide, lye, and sulfuric acid. Let's pause for quiz question number 3. Which physical hazard causes visible destruction of the skin, eyes, or lining of the respiratory tract or the gastrointestinal tract? Is it A, flammable liquids, B, corrosives, C, radioactive materials, or D, oxidizers? That's right, the answer is B. Corrosives cause visible destruction of the skin, eyes, or lining of the respiratory tract or the gastrointestinal tract. Now let's move on to discuss the hazard classification for health hazards. Specifically, health hazards can be broken into the following categories: acute toxicity, skin corrosion or irritation, serious eye damage or eye irritation, respiratory or skin sensitization, germ cell mutagenicity, carcinogenicity, reproductive toxicology, target organ systemic toxicity, single exposure, target organ systemic toxicity, repeated exposure, and aspiration toxicity. The first category is acute toxicity, or poisonous. This is defined as those adverse effects resulting from exposure to a single dose of a substance or from multiple doses of a substance over a short period of time, such as within 24 hours. Exposure may be through the three major routes: mouth, oral, skin, dermal, or breathing, inhalation. Chemical agents are classified as acutely toxic based on the number of deaths that occur following brief or acute exposure. The difference in the categories is strictly the dose at which the toxicity or death occurs. Here you see the pictograms, signal word, and hazard statement for acute oral toxicity, which ranges from fatal if swallowed to may be harmful if swallowed. The next category of health hazards is skin corrosion and skin irritation. Specifically, skin corrosion is irreversible damage to the skin following exposure to the hazardous substance. Some examples are sodium hydroxide, lye, and sulfuric acid. On the other hand, skin irritation is reversible damage, such as inflammation, to the skin following exposure to the hazardous substance. Another category of health hazards includes serious eye damage and eye irritation. Serious eye damage is tissue damage in the eye or serious physical decay of vision following exposure to the hazardous substance to the front surface of the eye, which is not fully reversible, whereas eye irritation involves changes in the eye following exposure to the hazardous substance to the front surface of the eye, which are fully reversible. The next health hazard that we will discuss is respiratory, that is, breathing, sensitization, or skin sensitization. A sensitizer, or allergen, causes little or no reaction on first exposure. The problem arises on subsequent exposures when a marked immunological response occurs. Specifically, a respiratory sensitizer is a substance that includes hypersensitivity of the airways following inhalation of the substance. Also, a skin sensitizer is a substance that will induce an allergic response following skin contact. Some examples include toluene diisocyanate, nickel compounds, and poison ivy. Next, let's go over the health hazard of germ cell mutagenicity. Mutagenicity is the ability of some chemicals to modify the genetic material in the nucleus of cells in ways that allow the changes to be transmitted during cell division. In particular, a mutation is a permanent change in the amount or structure of the genetic material in a cell, and a mutagen is the agent causing the change. Another type of health hazard is carcinogenicity. Specifically, a carcinogen is a chemical substance or a mixture of chemical substances which induce cancer or increase its incidence. Some examples include asbestos, inorganic arsenic, and formaldehyde. The next type of health hazard we will go over is called reproductive toxicity. This includes adverse effects on sexual function and fertility in adult males and females, as well as adverse effects on development of the offspring. Another type of health hazard is target organ systemic toxicity, single exposure, which is specific, non-lethal target organ toxicity arising from a single exposure to a chemical. This can occur by any route that is relevant for humans, such as oral, dermal, or inhalation. On the other hand, target organ systemic toxicity, repeated exposure, is specific target organ toxicity arising from repeated exposure to a chemical. The final type of health hazard that we will go over is called aspiration toxicity. Specifically, aspiration is the entry of a liquid or solid chemical product into the trachea and lower respiratory system directly through the oral or nasal cavity, or indirectly from vomiting. Now here is quiz question number 4. Which health hazard is defined as adverse effects on sexual function and fertility in adult males and females, as well as adverse effects on development of the offspring? Is it A, acute toxicity, B, germ cell mutagenicity, C, reproductive toxicity, or D, A and C? Yes, the answer is C. Reproductive toxicity is defined as adverse effects on sexual function and fertility in adult males and females, as well as adverse effects on development of the offspring. Now that we have gone over the types of physical and health hazards specified in the Hazard Communication System, we will discuss the use of labels for hazardous materials. The standardized label elements included in the GHS system are symbols, or hazard pictograms, which convey health, physical, and environmental hazard information, assigned to a GHS hazard class and category. Signal words, such as danger or warning, which are used to emphasize hazards and indicate the relative level of severity of the hazard, assigned to a GHS hazard class and category. And hazard statements, which are standard phrases assigned to a hazard class and category that describe the nature of the hazard. Here are the label symbols for hazard pictograms. These include the harmonized hazard symbols, plus other graphic elements, such as borders, background patterns, or colors, which are intended to convey specific information. Labels also contain signal words. The signal word indicates the relative degree of severity of a hazard. The signal words used in the GHS are danger for the more severe hazards and warning for the less severe hazards. Only one signal word corresponding to the class of the most severe hazard should be used on a label. Labels also contain hazard statements. These are standardized and assigned phrases that describe the hazards as determined by hazard classification. An appropriate statement for each GHS hazard should be included on the label for products possessing more than one hazard. An example of a hazard statement is toxic if swallowed. Here's a diagram that shows where each of the GHS label elements can be found. GHS label elements include product name or identifier, which identifies hazardous ingredients where appropriate, the signal word, the hazard statement, supplemental information, precautionary measures and pictograms, first aid statements, and the name, address, and telephone number of the company who supplies the product. Here is a sample of a label for a mock product called Toxiflam. As you see, it has two pictograms, and the hazard statements are danger, toxic if swallowed, flammable liquid and vapor. So here is quiz question number 5. When reading the label for hazardous materials, which element of the label contains the words danger or warning? Is it A, signal words, B, hazard statement, C, precautionary measures, or D, pictograms? You got it. The answer is A. The signal words are the elements of the label that contain the words danger or warning. In addition to labels, each chemical and hazardous material has a safety data sheet, or SDS. This provides comprehensive information for use in workplace chemical management. Employers and workers use the SDS as a source of information about hazards and to obtain advice on safety precautions. The SDS is product-related and, usually, is not able to provide information that is specific for any given workplace where the product may be used. Information in an SDS also provides a source of information for other target audiences, such as those involved with the transport of dangerous goods, emergency responders, poison centers, those involved with the professional use of pesticides, and consumers. The safety data sheet contains 16 sections. The first section is the identification of the substance or mixture and of the supplier. The second section is the hazards identification. The third section is the composition, information on ingredients. The fourth section is on first aid measures. The fifth section is on firefighting measures. The sixth section explains accidental release measures, such as personal precautions, protective equipment, and emergency procedures. The seventh section describes handling and storage, which includes information on precautions for safe handling and conditions for safe storage. The eighth section is on exposure controls and personal protection. The ninth section describes the physical and chemical properties of the hazardous material. The 10th section describes the chemical stability and reactivity. The 11th section gives toxicological information. The 12th section gives ecological information. The 13th section provides disposal considerations. The 14th section gives transport information. The 15th section provides regulatory information, and the 16th section provides other information, including information on preparation and revision of the SDS. So here is quiz question number 6. Which of the following is not a section of a safety data sheet? Is it A, first aid measures, B, purposeful release measures, C, handling and storage, or D, transport information? Right, the answer is B. Purposeful release measures are not a section of a safety data sheet. Now that we have covered the safety data sheet, let's go over the topic of hazardous materials in the workplace. Generally, the position of behavior technician does not require the use of hazardous materials as part of the job description. However, it is possible that behavior technicians may come into contact with various chemicals or hazardous materials, such as common household items, while on the job. For any chemicals or hazardous materials, it is important for behavior technicians to read the safety data sheet before use. Let's go over a sample safety data sheet, or SDS, for Clorox disinfecting wipes, citrus blend, which is a chemical that behavior technicians may use to disinfect toys or equipment used with clients. Here is the first section of the safety data sheet for Clorox disinfecting wipes, citrus blend, which identifies the product. In Section 2, you can see that the product is not considered hazardous by the 2012 OSHA HCS. The third section shows its ingredients. The fourth section provides possible first aid measures. For instance, if the disinfecting wipe came into contact with your eye, you should hold your eye open and rinse slowly and gently with water for 15 to 20 minutes. If present, you should remove your contact lenses after the first 5 minutes of rinsing, then continue rinsing your eye. Call a poison control center or doctor for further treatment or advice. If irritation occurs to the skin, then rinse your skin with plenty of water, and if irritation persists, then call a doctor. If you somehow inhaled the disinfecting wipe, then you should move to fresh air, and if breathing problems develop, call a doctor. If you somehow ingested a disinfecting wipe, you should drink a glass full of water and then call a doctor or poison control center. The fifth section provides firefighting measures. The sixth section provides accidental release measures. Specifically, the personal precautions are to avoid contact with eyes. Section 7, which provides information on handling and storage, specifies that you should handle disinfecting wipes in accordance with good industrial hygiene and safety practice. You should avoid contact with eyes, skin, and clothing. Also, you should not eat, drink, or smoke while using these disinfecting wipes. As for storage, you should keep containers tightly closed in a dry, cool, and well-ventilated place. Section 8 goes over exposure controls and personal protection. Specifically, this safety data sheet lists that there is no special protective equipment required for the eyes, skin, or respiratory systems when using the disinfecting wipes. Section 9 lists the physical and chemical properties. Section 10 lists the stability and reactivity, which are either unknown or none. Section 11 lists toxicological information, which explains that only irritation may occur to the respiratory tract, eyes, skin, or mucous membranes, and gastrointestinal tract. As for ecological information in Section 12, there is none available. Section 13 describes that disposal should be in accordance with applicable federal, state, and local regulations. Section 14 describes that transportation of these disinfecting wipes is not regulated. Section 15 provides regulatory information, such as information from the Clean Water Act and the Environmental Protection Agency. It also lists information relevant to California Proposition 65, which is that these disinfecting wipes do not contain any of those chemicals. Finally, Section 16 lists other information, including the address and phone number of the company. Now let's pause for quiz question number 7. True or false? The safety data sheet for Clorox disinfecting wipes, Citrus Blend, states that special protective equipment is required for the eyes, skin, and respiratory system during use. Is it A, true, or B, false? That's right. The answer is B, false. The safety data sheet for Clorox disinfecting wipes, Citrus Blend, does not state that special protective equipment is required for the eyes, skin, and respiratory systems during use. Now that we have reviewed information on the hazard classification system, labels, and safety data sheets, let's go over how behavior technicians can reduce their exposure to hazardous materials in the workplace. In particular, we will discuss ways to reduce or eliminate hazardous materials, precautions that can be taken, general handling guidelines, general storage guidelines, and general responses to emergencies. First, in order to reduce or eliminate the use of hazardous materials, you should select alternatives when possible. Specifically, you should use less toxic cleaners, such as green cleaning products or non-toxic products. It may also be helpful to choose products with little or no scent. Moreover, you should avoid using aerosols and avoid products or processes that produce airborne dusts which can be inhaled. Finally, avoid using old supplies, unlabeled supplies, and be wary of donated supplies. Now let's go over some precautions that you can take before handling hazardous materials. First, it is important to refer to and review your organization's safety training, as well as the safety data sheets for the hazardous materials. Also, make sure to wear proper protective equipment if indicated. Furthermore, it is good practice to keep emergency numbers listed in your phone before an emergency arises. If relevant, maintain equipment in good order to prevent leaks and breakdowns. Also, cover any of your cuts and sores with bandages before using materials. Finally, keep food and drinks out of the area if using hazardous materials. Another important precaution to take before handling hazardous materials is to read and follow labels. Specifically, read and follow label instructions carefully. Potentially hazardous products often have warnings aimed at reducing exposure of the user. For example, if a label says to use the product in a well-ventilated area, then you should go outdoors or in areas equipped with an exhaust fan to use it, or open up windows to provide air. Here are some additional precautions to prevent poisoning. First, make sure to leave the original labels on all products and read the label before using. Also, keep the items in their original containers. Use child-resistant packaging properly by closing the container securely after use. Finally, keep all chemicals and medicines locked up and out of sight of children. Now let's discuss some general guidelines for safe handling of hazardous materials. First, supervise children closely to prevent unintended uses of materials. Also, use the smallest amount necessary to minimize spills and mishaps. Additionally, maintain adequate ventilation systems to reduce concentrations of airborne chemicals. Wash your hands after using materials and do not use solvents to clean skin. Lastly, watch for unusual reactions to chemicals. Next, let's go over some general guidelines for storing hazardous materials. Hazardous materials should be clearly labeled before storing, have lids and caps that are tightly sealed and that are childproof, be put in their appropriate containers, since corrosive materials can eat away at improper containers, causing spills and holes. Never be stored in food or beverage containers. Be kept out of reach of children and animals. Be kept away from food, and be in containers that are kept dry to prevent corrosion. Now here is quiz question number 8. Which of the following is a general guideline for storing hazardous materials? Is it A, store in clearly labeled containers, B, store in containers with lids that are loosely sealed, C, store in any container that is available, or D, store near food and beverage containers? Absolutely, the answer is A. A general guideline for storing hazardous materials is to store them in clearly labeled containers. Now let's go over some guidelines for how to respond to an emergency if it occurs. First, if a person has been exposed to a hazardous material, call 911 if the person is having trouble breathing or shows obvious signs of distress. Try to keep the person calm and in close sight. If the injury is due to ingestion of poisonous product, call the Poison Control Center at 1-800-222-1222. Also, follow the first aid instructions on the label or safety data sheet. If exposure to the hazardous material results in skin irritation, the general first aid response is to rinse the skin with water. Then call the National Poison Control Center hotline at 1-800-222-1222, the nearest certified poison control center, or a doctor for more advice. If exposure to a hazardous material results in eye irritation, the general first aid response is as follows. 1. Hold eye open with fingers and immediately rinse with water for at least 5 minutes. 2. If wearing contact lenses, remove them after 5 minutes of washing and continue to rinse eye at least 5 minutes. 3. Note, rinse time depends on the degree of irritancy associated with a particular product. 4. For more information and advice, call the National Poison Control Center hotline at 1-800-222-1222, the nearest certified poison control center, or a doctor. If a person has inhaled a hazardous material, the general response is to move the person into fresh air and to call the National Poison Control Center hotline at 1-800-222-1222, the nearest certified poison control center, or a doctor for more advice. With regard to poisoning, the general first aid response is as follows. Remain calm. Not all medicines and household chemicals are poisonous, and not all exposures necessarily result in poisoning. For medicines, call the Poison Control Center at 800-222-1222 or a doctor immediately. For household chemical products, call the Poison Control Center or follow the first aid instructions on the label. If unable to contact them, call your local emergency number, 911 in most areas, or the operator. When you contact the Poison Control Center or other emergency personnel, be prepared to give the facts to the expert on the other end of the phone. Have the label ready when you call the expert. The label provides information concerning the product's contents and advice on what immediate first aid to perform. This will be useful when giving first aid and when you call the Poison Control Center. Now for our next quiz question. Question number 9 is, which of the following is a general first aid response to eye irritation resulting from exposure to a hazardous material? Is it A, rinse skin with water, B, rinse eyes with water, C, move into fresh air, or D, all of the above? You got it. The correct answer is B. Rinsing eyes with water is a general first aid response to eye irritation resulting from exposure to a hazardous material. The second part of this training is on California's Proposition 65, which came about as part of the Safe Water and Toxic Enforcement Act in 1986. It aimed at protecting California citizens and water sources from chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm, and to inform citizens about exposure to such chemicals. It requires the state to publish a list of chemicals and substances publicly annually. There were over 800 chemicals on the list since it was first published in 1987, and every year it is amended and updated. The chemicals on the Proposition 65 annual list contain 2 types of chemicals, carcinogens and reproductive toxicants. As we have discussed, carcinogens cause cancer, and reproductive toxicants cause birth defects and reproductive harm, such as sterility or miscarriages. These, along with other chemicals, may be additives or ingredients found in the following: pesticides, common household products, foods, drugs, industrial chemicals, dyes or solvents used in dry cleaning, byproducts or chemical processes, and motor vehicle exhaust. Along with the annual list that is required to include the chemicals with carcinogens or reproductive toxins, Proposition 65 requires businesses to post a clear and reasonable warning prior to knowingly and intentionally exposing anyone to a chemical listed. The warning can be included on a label of a consumer product, published in a newspaper, or posted publicly. Listing the warning label is only required if the exposure may present a significant risk of cancer or reproductive harm to a consumer. Here is our final quiz question, number 10. What is the focus of Proposition 65? Is it A, protecting California citizens and water sources from chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm? B, notifying California citizens of contaminated water sources? C, informing California citizens of explosive hazards? Or D, all of the above? Right, the answer is A. The focus of Proposition 65 is to protect California citizens and water sources from chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm. This brings us to the end of the training on hazardous materials and Proposition 65 training. Safety is everyone's responsibility, and care should be taken with physical and health hazards. It is important to understand and read labels, safety data sheets, and warning signs in order to reduce your exposure to hazardous materials. Finally, you should notify your supervisor or management team if there is a concern regarding potentially hazardous materials or exposure to carcinogenic or reproductive toxins. This training was designed by Helen Motter, a board-certified behavior analyst, and Corrine Pilkington, a board-certified behavior analyst and licensed marriage and family therapist. This training program was designed to meet the training requirements for the following credentials or certifications: the Registered Behavior Technician, or RBT, and the Board-Certified Autism Technician, or BCAT. The RBT task list items covered in this training include Section E, Documentation and Reporting Section, specifically E-04, comply with applicable legal, regulatory, and workplace reporting requirements. This training also covered the Board-Certified Autism Technician, or BCAT, Task List Section F on ethical and legal considerations, specifically F-1, Safety, including OSHA. It also covered the BCAT Code of Ethics Section 1, Legal Requirements, specifically 1-1, adhere to all laws, regulations, policies, and ethical standards that apply to the practice of providing applied behavior analysis. Some of the references used in this training include a guide to the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS, as well as information from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Department of Transportation, and a document called Hazard Communication, Hazard Classification Guidance for Manufacturers, Importers, and Employers from 2016. Additional references included information from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, Poison Control, the Proposition 65 Clearinghouse, and a safety data sheet from the Clorox Company. Thank you for participating in this training program. Please feel free to access the printable resources and/or examination that accompany this training.